The time has come. It is my annual Breakout Starting Pitchers video. Last year, I selected a trio of arms: Luis Severino, Ryan Pepio, and Joe Ryan. And then I made individual videos on guys like Hunter Brown, Bailey Ober, and Hunter Green. So looking back, how did I do? Pretty incredible, I would say. I chose more in vogue names, sure, but every guy I had posted better than their Fangraphs WAR projection for varying reasons, with the overarching theme of health. This year, I've already done some analysis on guys like Mackenzie Gore and Max Meyer, as well as a recent video on Clay Holmes and Jack Leiter, but I want to get my hands on a few more names. So the parameters for this video are to not select a pitcher that is projected for greater than 2 Fangraphs WAR, and in order for this to be a correct breakout pick, I need them to post 25% above their current projected WAR total. Gavin Williams is my first name. Although spring numbers can be finicky due to the tracking differences between these spring training ballparks, some are using Hawkeye, others are using TrackMan. When a change in numbers lines up with reporting, we can be a bit more confident that something has changed. Looking at a simple export from Baseball Savant, we can see that Gavin Williams' release point is up and his extension down the mound is down when we compare spring data in 2025 to 2024. He has also told MLB.com that he has a focus to stand taller on his back leg, and when he gets too deep in that back leg, it creates a more sinker shape on his four-seam fastball. The result of this back leg tinkering has been an improved four-seam shape. His velocity is the same, but he added 2 inches of vertical break. Now, because he's releasing the ball higher this spring, what we expect his vertical break to be will also be higher. If he added 2 inches of vertical break and didn't change anything from a release standpoint, it's going to cause a stuff model to fall in love with you. But the most common situation is a release change alongside a shape change, as Williams has done. And when that happens, we kind of have to figure out if the trade-off was worth it. Basic stuff models think it was about an even trade for Gavin Williams. If you want to think optimistically, we don't have arm angle data this spring, just release height. And I think arm angle would do a better job of describing how his slot has potentially changed and help it describe how his four-seam could maybe play above these stuff numbers. He also has a chance to do one of the most in vogue things in the sport, which is to improve your four-seam fastball and then not throw it a lot. The last season, he used his four-seamer 54% of the time to right-handed hitters, and it kind of got tagged. As we look forward to this season, I imagine the Guardians and Gavin Williams have an idea that this improved four-seam shape will play better, and that will even out the poor results he had on the offering. But I'm kind of a sucker for sinkers. I've talked about this in other videos, and we're getting to the point where even guys who create really high efficiency and carry on their four-seam fastballs are adding sinkers. I think about Jeff Hoffman and Tariq Skubal, who've both succeeded despite the fact they are high spin efficiency. So I'm holding out a bit of hope that eventually Gavin Williams might add a sinker against right-handed hitters. But it's not just the fastball, we also see a new slider for Gavin Williams, which is an easy change to spot by looking at his plot from last year and comparing it to this spring. His spring slider is slower, down from about 90 miles per hour to 86 miles per hour, but it picked up about 7 or 8 inches of sweep, going from more of a cutter shape to a true sweeper shape. Now, this sweeper is generally in repertoires to generate swing miss versus right-handed hitters, but I'm not too worried about left-handed hitters with Gavin because his curve is good as his primary breaking ball to lefties, and he also has a reasonable changeup. And while Savant has him adding a cutter last year, to my eye, this was the exact same pitch as his slider in terms of shape and intent. It's just classified separately for some reason. This is kind of my way to say there's still space in his mix for some kind of lefty contact neutralizer, depending on how his new fastball looks, whether it be a new iteration of a cutter or a harder version of this old slider that he's not throwing much anymore. So Gavin has a better fastball and he tweaked his slider alongside better mechanics. I think that alone is a reason to be bullish on him. I'm holding out hope for a sinker eventually and maybe some kind of cutter if the four-seamer plays down to left-handed hitters. I like him overall. If we look at the Fangraphs ATC projections of him, we're going to have to play with some of these numbers in order to get him to that 25% WAR over performance in order for this to be a correct breakout pick. I'm going to do that through jumping his strikeout rate and pulling down his barrels through home run rate a bit, and the result will be more of like a mid-threes ERA guy overall. I could just play with the inning total here and push that up, but I don't want to do that with Gavin Williams because I really think the per inning success of him as a pitcher is what will pop this year. He's not had a great health track record. That makes me a bit concerned about this breakout pick. But if you look at a lot of these guys projected below 2 WAR, they generally have warts. So that's why these breakouts I'm talking about in this video are maybe a bit more bold. We have to correct for multiple things in order to get them to the promised land, so to speak. For my second breakout, I wish I could just take the entire Marlins pitching staff, but I'll hang my hat on Edward Cabrera because as much as it is about the pitchers on this team, it's also about the insane turnover the Marlins have had from a pitching infrastructure standpoint. They have a new director of pitching, pitching coach, assistant pitching coach, and as I saw on X, there were numerous other research and development hires this offseason. While the full scope of this impact will probably take a few years to be felt, I think the immediate returns will be had at the major league level. You may be surprised that I'm not talking about Max Meyer here, but if you're subscribed to my Substack, then you probably already know how I feel about him. During the season, I'll post about 5 to 7 times a week detailing what I saw in the prior day's pitchers from an approach, shape, velocity, and stuff standpoint, and how it might impact the rest of their season. There's also a premium tier where you can get my super detailed top 40 pitching prospect ranks, which I'm working on an update of right now, and you'll get another update of that list in season. There's also monthly minor league pitchers to watch posts. A lot of this stuff includes non-public shape data from lower levels of the minor leagues. And there's a college pitcher breakdown as well around draft time, which is really my prep notes for when I'm covering the MLB draft for MLB Network. Cabrera has been a pretty popular name in breakout circles over the last couple seasons, and it's easy to see why. He throws really hard, he has good shapes, he just has the absolute bare minimum of command necessary to be a starting pitcher. But with him, instead of just projecting the command to improve and saying, poof, he's a new pitcher, my angle here is more from a usage perspective and identifying that I think he has a new slider. The slider he's flashed in spring is slightly slower than last year, and it's more of a true slider as opposed to a cutter, which we can see through this vertical break number. He traded 2 miles per hour of velocity for about 5 to 6 inches of sweep, which is a nice swap. This pitch was heavily underutilized for him last year. Even with the prior shape, I think it would have helped him to throw it more. But my assumption with this adjustment is that he and the Marlins now have confidence in this offering to throw it more in the 15 to 20% window to either handedness of hitter. And in both of those situations, I want to pull down his four-seam usage in order to accommodate that slider increase. Cabrera's strikeout minus walk rate was pretty solid versus righties last season, but his four-seam location was biased arm side down and in, which is where it was mostly getting clipped. I'm fine throwing this thing about 20% of the time still. I get that he can strike it well, but he has to elevate it when he does throw it. And that cut in usage is just going right back into this new slider we're talking about. His zone feel on the prior version of this pitch was actually pretty good, and it's going to allow far less damage than his four-seam at the present shape. Lefties, however, were a massive issue for Cabrera last season. This is where the K minus walk rate took a major hit, and we don't really see anything succeeding apart from his changeup. We can apply a similar principle here that we did with his righty approach. Just give me less four-seam, and let's make you more of a random number generator. Throw 4 pitches in that 20 to 30% window instead of relying on just 3 pitches, and that slider shape is picking up a lot of the slack. On the command side of things with Cabrera, I spoke to an individual in another organization who identified some things mechanically that were off with him, particularly in his front foot and how it would spin out upon his delivery, which caused some energy leak, and they thought this maybe affected some of his release angle consistency, but that organization didn't eventually get their hands on Cabrera. Instead, the Marlins brought in a new staff, and I'm very curious to see what theories they applied from a delivery standpoint to potentially fix his command. And again, with the projections, I'm going to be cautious in projecting a command improvement. I'm just going to do a very slight one, but what I'm really going to push is the strikeouts. And again, like Gavin Williams, Cabrera doesn't have a long track record of health. So even if he throws only about 130 innings, my projection here is really coming from the fact that on a per inning basis, I think he will improve a lot, which will allow him to hit maybe 1.8 WAR or so, which would allow, again, for this to be a correct breakout pick and hit that 25% over performance. For my last name, let's talk about the Yankees. There's a particular kind of pitcher they like, and you may have spotted it visually from watching them, but I think it's most notable in their pitch plots. Now, even if you don't know what these pitch plots are, and if you don't, I have a video that can help you out. I'll link to it in the video description. Just look at a few current and former Yankee arms. Here's Michael King, Hayden Wesneski, Cody Petit, and I think Clark Schmidt and Clay Holmes both fit this mold too. They're just variants of the archetype. All these guys have lower slots and create good, hard breaking ball shapes. To use fancy baseball lingo, they supinate well. And now remember that general structure of those plots and take a look at Will Warren. Very similar, right? The Yankees have been very good at understanding and implementing seam effects on their pitchers, which is this concept that you can optimize the orientation of a baseball in a pitcher's hand without really changing too much of the grip or the cue or anything that pitcher is doing, and just allowing that pitch and how the seams of that baseball interact with the air get to the eventual movement that you want, as opposed to cueing or really changing up the hand motion for a guy. And because of that, the Yankees have taken these guys who are naturally pretty east-west, as we saw in those plots, and given them serviceable four-seam fastballs, pretty good changeups, things that this kind of pitcher hasn't normally been able to do, and it's given them a lot of success. Will Warren is of that mold. His repertoire started as more sink slider, and it's evolved to have a pretty strong four-seam fastball, a serviceable changeup, and this spring he started mixing in a curveball. But his biggest strength to me is that he has a four-seam fastball and a sinker that both grade out above average by stuff models. Now, you may have thought earlier in those 5 names of pitchers I rattled off, wait, only Michael King and Clay Holmes are any good, and you'd be 100% correct. The differentiator in those profiles that make King good or Holmes good is that they have command. King is a top 30 pitcher because he can do whatever he wants with his sinker. He mixes it inside and outside to righties, and he keeps his fastball up and away. And probably most important is that he controls his misses. Warren, especially at the major league level last year, was missing up with his sinkers a lot and letting a lot of his sweepers leak back into right-handed hitters. So Warren needs to clean up the misses and probably needs some kind of bridge breaking ball in there, but his pathway to innings is much clearer now, with Luis Gil hampered in spring, as well as Garrett Cole potentially missing the full season. So I'm going to take the Fangraphs ATC projection that I see and multiply it slightly, assume they push this out to maybe about 80 to 100 innings or so overall, and if that's the case, I'm going to push the strikeouts up, which I've done consistently on a lot of these pitchers here, because I just don't think it's calculating some of the adjustments that they could potentially make from a location or a new pitch standpoint. And maybe that will get us to our 25% overperformance of his WAR. He's going to need probably to land in the 1.3 to 1.5 WAR window for this to hit. He's a prospect I've liked for a really long time. I think the fastballs are good. He hasn't really shown me too much to fade him, despite the really poor performance at the major league level last season. I sometimes think it's actually good for guys to get pounded and then go into the offseason and understand what they need to change. But enough of my breakout picks. Who do you have as your breakout for 2025? You could use my threshold here and pick guys that are a little deeper cut below that 2 WAR, or just give me anybody. But regardless of who you give me, they have to smash their WAR total. You could use my baseline of 25% if you want. And I will let you know in the comments whether I love it, hate it, absolutely hate it, will never agree with it ever, whether it's one that I kind of wish that I brought into here, because I do have other names on this list I'm looking at right now that I haven't really written about or videoed about or anything along those lines, but they're names that I do like. It's just really hard. It's weird when you pick 10 to 15 breakout names, but the 7 I have here, if I go 4 for 7, I'll be pretty happy. I'm probably not going to be on as much of a heater as I was last year and going 6 for 6 on those guys, but as always, thanks for watching. I'm excited to see who your breakout picks are in the comments.